SHE couldn't handle the pressure. Mom whispered loudly enough for the entire reunion tent to hear, dabbing at eyes that weren't wet while surrounded by relatives who'd gathered to hear the tragic tale of her daughter's academic collapse. Dropped out after 2 years. We tried to support her, but some children just aren't meant for that level of achievement. Dad shook his head with practiced sadness, playing his role in the narrative they'd constructed without ever asking me what actually happened. Nobody at that reunion knew that I'd left my PhD program to build the company that now writes the department's largest annual check, $2.3 million last year alone, or that the fellowship my parents were currently mourning had been renamed in my honor by faculty who understood exactly why I'd left. Let me tell you the truth my parents never wanted to hear. I was supposed to be the family's crowning achievement. The Andersons of Madison, Wisconsin, had produced teachers, accountants, and mid-level managers for 3 generations. Respectable careers, stable incomes, nothing remarkable. Then came me, the gifted child, the test score prodigy, the daughter who was going to break through to a level of accomplishment the family had never seen. PhD in biochemistry from Johns Hopkins. That was the plan. That was the promise I'd made at 17. Too young to understand what I was committing to, too desperate for my parents' approval to question whether it was actually what I wanted. I'd excelled in undergrad at the University of Wisconsin, graduating summa cum laude with offers from every top program in the country. My parents announced my Johns Hopkins acceptance at Thanksgiving dinner like it was their accomplishment, basking in the congratulations of relatives who didn't fully understand what a PhD was but knew it sounded impressive. Our daughter is going to be a doctor, Mom would say, not quite lying but not bothering to explain the difference between MD and PhD. I moved to Baltimore with their expectations packed alongside my textbooks. The first year was fine. Research, coursework, the standard initiation into academic life. I was good at it. The science made sense, the work was interesting enough, and I'd found a lab studying protein interactions that could eventually lead to cancer treatment breakthroughs. The second year, everything changed. Not because I was failing. I was succeeding brilliantly, so brilliantly that I saw something no one else had noticed. A pattern in the data, a potential application that extended far beyond academic research. What we were discovering in the lab had commercial possibilities that could help millions of patients faster than the traditional academic publication path ever would. I approached my advisor, Dr. Patricia Huang, with the idea of pursuing commercial development alongside our research. That's not what we do here, she said, not unkindly. Academia and industry are separate tracks. You need to choose. Why? Why can't the research serve both? Because that's not how the system works. You're here to become a researcher, not an entrepreneur. But I couldn't unsee what I'd seen. The data we were generating, trapped in academic papers that would take years to publish and more years to influence treatment, when it could be helping people now. The artificial wall between discovery and application that cost lives in the name of institutional tradition. I made my choice. I left Johns Hopkins at the end of my second year. Not because I couldn't handle the pressure. Not because I failed qualifying exams. Not because I wasn't smart enough or dedicated enough or any of the explanations my parents would later construct. I left because I'd found something more important to do. I took the research insights I'd developed, my own original work, carefully documented to avoid any intellectual property conflicts, and started a company. Vital Path Therapeutics, founded in a tiny office in Cambridge with 3 other people who shared my vision. Translating scientific discoveries into treatments without waiting for the glacial pace of academic publishing. I didn't tell my parents the real reason I left. Partly because I wasn't sure I'd succeed. Partly because they wouldn't have understood. Mostly because I was tired of seeking their approval for every decision. I'm leaving the program was all I said. Their reaction was immediate and devastating. You're throwing away your future. Dad's voice shook with anger. Everything we sacrificed for you. Every opportunity we gave you. I have an opportunity. Something important. I can't explain the details yet, but you can't explain because there's nothing to explain. You failed. You couldn't handle it, so you're quitting. That's not what happened. Then what happened? What could possibly be more important than a PhD from Johns Hopkins? I tried to explain. The science, the commercial potential, the chance to help patients faster than academia allowed. They heard none of it. You're starting a company? Mom's voice dripped with contempt. With what money? What experience? You're a dropout, not a businesswoman. I have investors interested. People who understand the science. Investors. Dad laughed bitterly. So you're asking strangers for money instead of finishing what you started. That's what this is. They'd made up their minds. Their daughter, the family's great hope, had crumbled under pressure and was now chasing some fantasy to avoid admitting failure. The narrative was set before I finished explaining. I stopped trying to explain. Vital Path Therapeutics launched in 2015 with $1.2 million in seed funding. By 2017, we developed a diagnostic platform based on my original research that could identify cancer markers faster and more accurately than existing methods. By 2019, we'd partnered with 3 major hospital systems for clinical trials. By 2021, our technology was being used in oncology departments across North America. I'd been right. The science I'd seen in that Hopkins lab had commercial potential that academic publishing would have delayed by a decade. Vital Path had brought it to patients in 6 years. The company was valued at $340 million. I owned 34% of it. My parents knew none of this. To them, I was still the dropout who'd failed at Johns Hopkins, struggling with some vague business thing they assumed would eventually collapse. They didn't ask for details, and I'd stopped offering them. The distance between us grew with every year, every family reunion where they performed their disappointment for an audience of relatives who'd never heard my side of the story. The Hopkins donation started in 2020. The department that housed my former lab was chronically underfunded, equipment outdated, fellowships inadequate, talented researchers leaving for better resourced institutions. The research I'd built my company on had come from that department. It seemed right to give back. I established the anonymous fund through a foundation, structured so my identity was completely protected. The first year, I donated $500,000. The department chair nearly fell over. "We've never received a gift like this," Dr. Huang told me when I reached out privately to discuss how the funds should be used. She didn't know I was the donor, just that someone had asked her to advise on allocation. "The donor wants to support translational research," I explained. "Work that bridges academic discovery and practical application. That's exactly what we've been trying to do. But the funding has never been there." I increased the donation to $1.5 million the next year. Then $2.3 million. The anonymous gift became the department's largest annual funding source, supporting fellowships, equipment, and a new initiative focused on exactly what I'd proposed as a graduate student: parallel paths for academic and commercial development of research. They named a fellowship after the ideals of the anonymous donor, the Translational Science Fellowship, for students who wanted to pursue both research and real-world impact. Nobody connected it to the dropout who'd left in 2015. The reunion confrontation happened last summer. I'd avoided family gatherings for years, but my grandmother was turning 90, and I couldn't skip that. I drove to Wisconsin knowing I'd face the performance again. My parents' theatrical disappointment, the pitying looks from relatives, the whispered conversations that stopped when I approached. What I didn't expect was the scale of it. Someone had set up a memory board with photos from throughout my grandmother's life. My parents had contributed extensively, including several photos from my academic career. Undergrad graduation, the day I got into Hopkins, the celebration dinner when I'd made it. Before everything went wrong, I overheard Mom tell a cousin, gesturing at the photos. She had such potential. "What happened?" the cousin asked. She couldn't handle the pressure. Mom's whisper carried across the tent. "Dropped out after 2 years. We tried to support her, but some children just aren't meant for that level of achievement." Dad joined in, shaking his head. "We still don't know what she does. Some startup thing. It's been 10 years. If it was going to succeed, wouldn't it have by now?" I stood there, holding a plate of potato salad, listening to my parents eulogize my potential to relatives who nodded sympathetically at the tragedy of wasted promise. Something inside me snapped. "Actually," I said, stepping into their circle, "it did succeed." The conversation stopped. Mom's face froze mid-expression. "Vital Path Therapeutics. That's my company. We developed cancer detection technology that's now used in over 200 hospitals. We were valued at $340 million in our last funding round." "Sweetheart," Dad started. "I didn't drop out because I couldn't handle the pressure. I left because I saw an opportunity to help people faster than academic research allowed. The same research I was doing at Hopkins, the work you were so proud of, I turned it into something that's actually saving lives now. Not in 20 years when it finally works through the publication system. Now. Silence. Every relative in earshot was frozen. You want to know what I do? I run a company with 180 employees. I've raised $47 million in funding. I donate $2.3 million annually to the Hopkins Biochemistry Department. Anonymously, because I didn't want anyone to connect it to the dropout. Mom's face had gone pale. What? The Translational Science Fellowship? The one Hopkins announced last year? I funded it. The new equipment in the lab where I used to work? I paid for it. The entire commercial research initiative that's changing how the department operates? That's my money. My vision. The thing you've spent 10 years telling people I failed at. The aftermath was chaos. Relatives who'd spent years feeling sorry for me were now staring at my parents, recalculating everything they'd been told. My mother was crying, whether from shock, embarrassment, or something else, I couldn't tell. My father looked like a man whose foundation had just crumbled. I didn't stay to watch. I found my grandmother in her chair by the gift table, sharp-eyed as ever despite her 90 years. I always knew, she said when I sat beside her. Your mother tells one story, but I could see you were doing something that mattered. You don't get that look in your eyes from failure. Why didn't you say anything? Would they have listened? She patted my hand. Some people need their narratives more than they need truth. Your parents needed you to be their accomplishment. When you chose your own path, they couldn't accept it. It hurt, Grandma. All these years. I know, but look at what you built while they weren't watching. Maybe that's the point. Maybe you needed to build it without their approval to prove it was really yours. My parents called the next day, and the day after, and every day for 2 weeks. I finally answered on day 15. We didn't know, Mom said, her voice small. You never told us. I tried. The day I left Hopkins. You didn't want to hear it. You could have tried again. You could have shown us. Why? Why was it my job to convince you I wasn't a failure? Why couldn't you just trust that I knew what I was doing? We were worried about you. You were worried about your story. The family's first PhD. Your accomplishment. When I didn't deliver that, you wrote me off. Silence. I'm not angry anymore, I continued. I was for years. But I built something that matters while you were busy being disappointed. Your opinion stopped being relevant a long time ago. Can we see it? Your company? Maybe. Someday. But not because you finally believe in it. If you visit, it'll be because you want to know me, the actual person I became, not the achievement you wanted me to be. That was 6 months ago. We're still working on it. The relationship, the trust, the years of distance that can't be erased with one revelation. My parents are trying, visiting my office, asking questions about my work, learning to be proud of something they didn't plan or control. It's awkward. It's painful sometimes. But it's honest, which is more than we had before. The Hopkins donation continues, no longer anonymous. Last month, I gave a lecture to the department about my journey. The graduate student who saw something others missed, the dropout, who built it into a company that now employs 20 Hopkins alumni. Dr. Huang introduced me with tears in her eyes. I told her once that academia and industry were separate tracks, she admitted to the audience. She proved me wrong. We're all better for it. My parents weren't there. They're not ready for that yet. But my grandmother's words stay with me. Some people need their narratives more than they need truth. I don't need their narrative anymore. I have my own.